Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and on this episode of Cull the Week, I want to talk about the Wizards. Seriously. I think Wizards were one of the strongest factions early in the game, but I've long felt that they haven't aged well. When you think about Smash Up from a functional perspective, the Wizards exist to do something, and you choose them as a partner to fill that need. What do the Wizards do? They draw cards and play a lot of actions, but card draw is a generic mechanic that is replicated in a number of ways, so their main identifying trait is their extra action plays. They have below average power because of this, and as I said in my Archmage video, I'm not sure that was necessary when you look at the factions that have come since, so they definitely seem like a candidate for Cull the Week, the series where we make sure that every faction is perfectly balanced, and I thought Thanos would appreciate it if we did an episode this week. But their opponent is surprising, the Disco Dancers. I have a very specific reason for this. The Wizards play a lot of extra actions, but what do you do with the extra actions? They are most potent in terms of breaking a base, and you pair the Wizards with powerful action factions. But the Disco Dancers copy the effect of actions, which is akin to playing the same action twice. Instead of getting extra actions, you get extra benefits from the same powerful action. And this is interesting because they won't benefit everyone, particularly non-standard action factions, but they will benefit many. Sometimes replaying a powerful action is better than an extra action because the extra action is not as good. And if it were better, that would be the one to play and copy instead. The Disco Dancers provide a different way of achieving the same basic goal, in my opinion. It's rare that action quantity matters more than quality, and that makes this battle interesting. But the problem is, the Disco Dancers are one of the few factions with no double features. This will make it hard to line up their cards, but I'm trying to accommodate that anyway. Given that this is a battle of action comparison, I want to speak briefly about the card draw comparison. By my estimation, the Wizards draw 9 cards total. This is because you get 3 draws with the Enchantress and net 2 cards with Mystic Studies. I'm not counting the first card you draw because it just replaces Mystic Studies. I'm also assuming that 50% of your neophytes will hit actions and that Portal will draw 2 minions. Note that I am not including Sacrifice. The Disco Dancers will draw about 4 or 5 cards, maybe more, depending on how well they copy Disco Inferno and whether or not opponents do the same. So the card draw is more comparable than you realize. Just a reminder that I do not factor in the Titan when making these comparisons, and it's especially true for the Wizards because many players were surprised that they got a Titan at all. To see if they truly needed a bump, we have to consider their cards in a vacuum, so let's start with the minions. The Power 2s have very little in common. The Neophyte can function as either an extra play or a means to draw a card, if the top card is an action and you chose not to play it. The Roller has a delayed ability of getting a +1 counter. One way to view the comparison is that the Neophyte can make an extra play, whereas the Roller can make a play more useful. Honestly, the Roller is weak. It reaches the same power as many other 2s, but in a convoluted manner and generally needs help to reach its full potential. The Neophyte has a chance to do nothing, but it also has a chance to be useful. I never rely on Neophyte as part of a base breaking, but the Wizards have some cards that only make sense as a Neophyte free play, such as Mystic Studies. I think the Neophytes are great minions to lead with, and their versatility and upside is much greater than the Roller, so Wizards take the lead. I think this might be the first time that the Challenge faction has ever won the first match of the first round. The next tier is even harder to compare. Enchantress, a below average power minion who draws a card, versus the Diva, one of the most complicated abilities in the game. Honestly, this isn't even close. I love drawing cards, but the Diva upside is far too good. You don't have to worry about drawing cards as much if the card you played becomes much more efficient. Entire strategies are built around the Diva, and the Enchantress isn't that good at drawing cards. Many minions have replaced it. This is an easy win for Diva, tying the score at 1-1. The next pairing isn't even close. The Chrono Mage is a below average power extra action play. Disco Lu is a regular power minion with an extra action play or action recursion, and it has a much better pop culture reference. Other than a specific, crazy killer plant play, Disco Lu is obviously better. This one's easy, Disco Dancers 2-1. The final minion is much harder. The Archmage gives an extra action every turn, which is fantastic. But it is not a talent, which is unfortunate, but not as unfortunate as 4 power though. And this is where the general philosophical question comes back. What is better, an extra action or a single action on steroids? That's really hard to answer, but consider this. The Archmage has not aged well. The idea of giving extra actions has been given to many other minions. But the Dancing King is unique. He can do some truly amazing things, enhancing positives, stealing positives, redirecting negatives. The playbook for this minion is only bound by your creativity, and there are some really crazy things you can do with Dancing King. And I think that gives Dancing King the edge because of the versatility. The truth is that most actions affect minions, and Dancing King acts like an immediate it's astounding. There are arguments to be made for Archmage, but I think the Dancing King gets a narrow victory, particularly when you consider that the Wizards don't have very many good candidates for those extra action plays. At the end of the minion phase, the Disco Dancers are leading 3-1, or tied if you chose Archmage. But the actions will be harder because of the lack of double features, so for those 2 cards, I'm going to compare them against 2 cards independently. Whoever wins the double feature gets the single point, because that is how it would normally work for a scoring system that I made up and doesn't matter at all. I'll start with Summon, which plays an extra minion. Fortunately, one of these is a wash with its Raining Men, which is the same. But there wasn't a clear corollary for the second, so I chose I Will Survive. Because playing an extra minion requires having a minion to play, and extra plays lose value when the minion you play loses value. I think Recursion normally ranks higher than extra plays, and given that this can be copied and retrieve multiple minions, I prefer the Disco Dancer pairing to the Wizard pairing. The Wizard pairings are lackluster for extra minion play targets, whereas the Disco Dancers are great I Will Survive targets. Taken together, I would love to play 2 Divas and get them both back, or play the Dancing King and get many great minions back. So Disco Dancers get the point, 4-1. The next one was much more complicated. Mystic Studies sounds great, but it's not. It's a fantastic neophyte play, but the odds of lining that up are slim without portal manipulation. If Mystic Studies did not exist, you'd have in hand one of the 5 cards Mystic Studies would draw, so it only nets 1 card. And the 2 Disco Dancer actions I've chosen also draw a card in addition to doing something else. And for that reason alone, the pair of I'm So Excited and Get Down Tonight have to win out. These are versatile actions that anyone can use, but work extremely well with the Disco Dancers. So again, the Disco Dancers win the point, 5-1. After those difficult comparisons, we'll start with an easy tie. Time Loop and Celebration, exactly the same, so a tie and moving on. Next, we have our Sacrifice a Minion play. Sacrifice for the Wizards themselves is terrible. They have largely on-play abilities, which is normally great for Sacrifice, but they have below average power, so you are drawing less cards. Last Dance allows your opponents to gain a VP, but with easy planning, Last Dance can be part of a massive play that nets you a ton of VP. It's a great endgame card and drives the faction, creating a race situation that really puts pressure on your opponents. The Wizards need help to make the sacrifice worthwhile, particularly an indestructible minion, whereas the Disco Dancers take care of their own and enhance the value. I love this card, and it's an easy win, 6-1. Next, we have the Mass Draw card. The Wizards can draw a lot of cards via Portal. It also allows them to rearrange their deck to give their neophytes more potency. The Disco Dancers can theoretically draw more cards with Disco Inferno while getting additional power, but this requires more setup and does give power to opponents, although you'd have to know that was a possibility before you played the card. I have to give this to Portal because it's easier to use and a great card to play early on. It solves multiple purposes with a single action and can affect up to 3 turns in advance, which is great. It's elegant and keeps you well stocked with minions, so the Wizards get the point, 6-2. The remaining 3 are very difficult to compare, particularly Scry. Scry's value is derived by the card it retrieves, and there are some very powerful actions in the game, but the Wizards don't have them. My most likely Scry target for them would be Summon. So for the Disco Dancers, I decided to compare Scry against the card I'd Scry for, and I chose Turn the Beat Around because Last Dance was already taken. Turn the Beat Around is a great special that can really swing a base. It requires some time to reach its full potential, but the ceiling is really high. How does this compare against other actions? I think that there are better Scry targets out there. Also, the Disco Dancers skew more towards winning on their turn than competing on other turns, so it's possible that the divas were already consumed and cannot copy the effect, which makes this a far more ordinary special. I think it's reasonable that a random partner faction would have a better scry target, so I'm giving scry the point, and the wizards inch closer 6-3. I'm not a fan of the remaining 2 wizard actions in all honesty. Winds of Change has only a handful of very specific playbooks. The extra action is necessary because you can get back the exact same cards. You can get back worse cards. If you don't like your hand, you will see those cards again. I honestly rarely play this. My typical play is that I am low on cards and want to draw back up to 5. If you have more than 5 cards and don't like your hand, odds are that you will get back much of that hand with fewer cards this time. Compare that against Staying Alive. This isn't exactly easy to use either. You need a minion in play and the same minion in the discard pile, which takes time to facilitate. You also need time to use that minion. Still, I think this is clearly superior, as it won't provide value early, but should be accessible mid-game. This is great for divas or disco lose if you are fortunate. But most of the win comes from Winds of Change being too situational in my opinion. Disco Dancers win it 7-3. That leaves Mass Enchantment and We Are Family. Here are my problems with Mass Enchantment. You generally have no idea what is going to happen. It's terrible in 2-player. You cannot count on it to do anything useful, and it's generally played when you have nothing else to do. You may luck out and pull out a fantastic action, but you probably won't. Some upside, but a lot of downside. We Are Family is interesting because it also has a chance to do nothing. It is a setup play that will yield value in a future turn, but that value is undeniable. For the Disco Dancers, that can mean returning an extra minion, extra movement, or extra power. It can mean an extra VP with Last Dance. It requires timing, but the flexibility is there, and other than a base breaking before the value is delivered, it is directly in your control. But once again, Mass Enchantment is too unreliable for serious consideration. Disco Dancers win again for a final score of 8-3 with 1 tie. Granted, Disco Dancers provide very little to play on something factions. Wizards would do much better. But when you are looking for a faction to pair with an action-based faction, I don't think the Wizards are the automatic pick. Since most actions are standard actions, the Disco Dancers might be the better choice, and I believe that is a sign of why the Wizards faded from relevance and got a Titan. While the actions tend to even out, it's the lack of power that really stands out, and it's not a surprise that the Arcane Protector focuses on that. In general, I just like the action copying of the Disco Dancers much better than the extra action play of the Wizards, and when you compare their utility cards, the Disco Dancer utility cards just seem superior. So I'm declaring them the winner, and it's not a surprise that the Wizards ended up getting a Titan simply because they're not as good as what they used to be. I tend to be pretty critical in Call of the Week videos, but I try to be as subjective as possible. Are there any card comparisons that you disagree with? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, let's shut it down.